So let's talk about a crime that sounds completely unimaginable today, but was a felony in parts of America not that long ago. We're going to dive into the story of how the simple act of two people falling in love and getting married sparked a landmark Supreme Court case that would change everything we thought we knew about a fundamental human right. And really, the whole thing boils down to this one incredibly powerful sentence. This wasn't some grand statement from a civil rights leader or a polished politician. It was just a simple, heartfelt message from a quiet construction worker named Richard Loving. And that sentence, that was the heart of a legal battle that would change the entire nation. Because you have to understand, in their home state of Virginia, the love Richard was talking about wasn't just frowned upon. No, it was a full-blown criminal offense, something you could go to prison for. So you gotta wonder, right? How on earth did this ordinary couple end up at the very center of such an extraordinary fight? Well, let's meet them. This is Richard Loving and Mildred Jeter. They grew up together in Central Point, a small rural Virginia town that was, especially for the time, pretty well integrated. They fell in love. And when Mildred got pregnant, they did what any young couple in love would do. They decided to get married. But they knew it was illegal in Virginia, so they drove up to Washington, D.C. and made it official in June of 1958. They came back home to Virginia, probably hoping they could just live a quiet life. But that quiet life, it didn't last long. Just 5 weeks later, based on an anonymous tip, the local sheriff burst into their bedroom in the dead of night. And the proof of their crime? It was their marriage certificate, which they'd proudly hung on the wall. They were arrested right there, in their own bed.
So that brings us to the big question: what was the actual case against their marriage? I mean, what law could they have possibly broken?
They had violated something called Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924. It was one of many so-called anti-miscegenation laws that existed all over the country. And its purpose? Well, it's pretty blunt right there in the name: to enforce a strict, rigid separation of the races.
Now, this is where things get really telling, because you can see the difference between what the state said in court and what they actually believed. Officially, Virginia's lawyers argued that, hey, marriage is a state's right to regulate, and they claimed the law was fair because it punished both the white and the non-white partner equally. But let's be real. Underneath that flimsy legal argument was this deep-seated ideology, rooted in fears about racial mixing, the bogus science of eugenics, and at the end of the day, a desire to maintain white supremacy. And if you want to know what they were truly up against, just listen to this. This wasn't some random person's opinion. This was the trial judge himself, the man holding their fate in his hands, justifying his ruling by saying that racial segregation was, literally, God's plan. So, with that hanging over their heads, the Lovings took a plea deal. They could avoid a year behind bars, but on one unbelievably cruel condition. They had to get out of Virginia and were banned from coming back together for 25 years. They were literally exiled from their home, their families, everything they knew. And that punishment, that forced exile, is what turned their personal heartbreak into a public fight. It didn't start as some grand crusade for civil rights. It started with a simple, powerful desire to just go home. The Lovings moved to D.C., but they were just completely miserable. They missed their families, they missed the quiet country, and after 5 long years of feeling isolated and frustrated, a homesick Mildred Loving decided she had to do something. So she took a chance and wrote a letter to the Attorney General of the United States, Robert F. Kennedy, begging for help. And that letter changed everything. Kennedy's office pointed her to the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And there, 2 young, passionate volunteer lawyers, Bernard Cohen and Philip Hirschkopf, heard their story and agreed to take on their case, completely free of charge. And man, this was not a quick fight. Just look at this timeline. From their arrest in 1958, it took almost a decade of legal battles, appeals, and constant setbacks to finally get their case in front of the highest court in the entire country. So that all leads us here, the final showdown at the Supreme Court. A case that would pit the simple wish of the Lovings to live together in their own home against the full power of the Commonwealth of Virginia. The ACLU's game plan was brilliant, and pretty simple, really. They had a 2-pronged attack, both centered on the 14th Amendment. First, the Equal Protection Clause. They argued that, come on, this law is nothing but pure racial discrimination. And second, the Due Process Clause. They made an even bigger point. The freedom to marry someone you love is a fundamental human right, and no state should have the power to take that away from anybody. And Virginia's response? Well, their lawyers basically just doubled down on the same old argument. They insisted that marriage was a state issue, not a federal one, and they kept pushing this ridiculous idea that the law couldn't possibly be discriminatory since it punished both the white and the black partner equally. Of course, the Supreme Court saw right through that. They knew it was all just a way to maintain white supremacy. And the court's decision, well, it would end up creating a legacy that is so much bigger than just this one couple. And then it happened. June 12, 1967, the decision comes down and it is unanimous. All 9 justices agreed. The Supreme Court struck down Virginia's law, and Chief Justice Earl Warren wrote that the freedom to marry is, quote, one of the basic civil rights of man. And that day, June 12th, is now celebrated every year as Loving Day. And boom, just like that, the impact was huge and immediate. Anti-miscegenation laws, like the one in Virginia, were still on the books in 16 other states, and with this one ruling, they were all instantly wiped out. Unconstitutional, gone. The ripple effects of this decision have been just profound. I mean, you can draw a straight line from this case to so many other civil rights milestones. It established that marriage is a fundamental right. It became a powerful legal tool against racial discrimination. And that precedent was absolutely crucial decades later in the 2015 Obergefell v. Hodges case, which legalized same-sex marriage. And just recently, in 2022, its core ideas were written into federal law with the Respect for Marriage Act. So what happened to the Lovings? Well, they finally got to go home to Virginia, where they lived a quiet life and raised their 3 kids. Richard was tragically killed in an accident in 1975, but Mildred lived all the way until 2008. And on the 40th anniversary of the court's decision, she gave a rare public statement, connecting her own fight to the ongoing struggle for marriage equality for same-sex couples. It just shows you how universal the principle of her case really is. And you know, that really leaves us with this one big thought. The story of Richard and Mildred Loving forces us all to ask, what does it actually mean for a right to be so basic, so fundamental, that no law, no state, no government should ever be allowed to take it away? It's a question their quiet courage answered for all of us.